Introduce Vanessa Carlson, who's the Range Program Manager for Pima County Natural Resources, Parks, and Recreation. And she has been helping to implement our ranch conservation element of the Sonoran Desert Conservation Plan since May of 2016. She has worked on cattle ranches across the southwestern U.S. and also for the U.S. Forest Service on the Tonto National Forest in Payson. Vanessa earned a Master of Science degree in 2013 at New Mexico State University in range science, with her research focusing on cattle grazing patterns in woodland grassland environments. She also assisted on a similar research project in Argentina. All right, Vanessa grew up in Tucson and did not anticipate a return after the above adventures until she had the opportunity to join the Pima County Range Program 3 years ago. So Vanessa is going to be speaking about the present and future of Pima County's Rangeland program. Welcome, Vanessa.
Thank you, Karen. I'm going to try to stand on this side. But anyway, as Karen mentioned, I'm the Range Program Manager or Rangeland Program Manager for Pima County Natural Resources, Parks and Recreation, which is in the Natural Resources Division. So I work with both Karen and Brian and several other coworkers in that division that are not here today, and then the rest of my team in the two other departments I work with quite a bit as well. So the range program is very colorful, so I like bright colors in this presentation, and I tried to put in as many photos as I could of the ranches and the natural resources that we care for on each of those ranches. So I'm talking about the present and future of our range program within Pima County. And we are going to go over the background of the Sonoran Desert Conservation Plan and the ranch acquisitions. So if you already heard this, this will be beaten into you again. We'll go over the range program administration that I try my best to oversee every day. We'll go over the rangeland monitoring program, which is not to be confused with the ecological monitoring program that Jeff and the others at OSC are implementing. And we'll go into the landscape and watershed level planning that we're beginning to do for each of the major zones that the ranches fall into. And last, I think the most exciting part is working on programs that might benefit beginning ranchers or people that have been farming or ranching for less than 10 years, is the technical definition, and current ranchers that we work with. So first of all, many of you know that the Sonoran Desert Conservation Plan that was developed back in the late 90s and early 2000s and has ever evolved since then is a science-based plan that guides development, economic development specifically, while balancing community growth. And basically it directs where it's best and most responsible for development to occur. Not if it's going to occur, but where. So in the beginning, it was initiated in 1997, it being the plan process itself, by the Pima County Board of Supervisors, following the federal listing of the cactus ferruginous pygmy owl. And this, I kind of think of this as maybe a last straw, where it was like, okay, we want to stop being reactive to every species that gets listed and then have to do all sorts of case-by-case planning and prevention, and then ultimately sometimes stopping development that may have been really good for economic growth for each species that was getting listed. So this was a proactive approach. This planning effort was a proactive approach rather than reacting to every limitation that came along. There was community involvement in the stages of this plan, and I was in middle school when this was all happening, so and maybe many of you were involved in this at that time. So thanks for doing all that really hard work, because now we get to implement it, which I think is really exciting. And in the end, there were many plant and animal species that the community being scientists, environmental groups, ranchers, developers, and university professionals and outside professionals Lots of them they all wanted to protect boatloads of animals and plants, but in the end, 44 species of most importance were chosen to be protected under the plan. And so overall, this plan was an effort to be proactive versus reactive to resource management and economic development throughout Pima County. So the 5 main conservation elements of the Sonoran Desert Conservation Plan, there'll be a test at the end, are, so we've got our critical habitat and biological corridors, our riparian areas, our mountain parks for recreation, our historical and cultural preservation, and of course our ranch conservation element that relates to all of the elements, but that I will be focusing on throughout this talk. So with this map here, I guess I can't really point with this, but this is the ranch conservation map that's actually in the Sonoran Desert Conservation Plan documents, and basically it shows all of the lands that were classified as ranch lands, northeast, southwest, and southeast and northwest of Tucson, of the Tucson area, and the eastern half of Pima County, and it basically directed where the ranch conservation element should be implemented through ranch acquisitions in eastern Pima County. All right, so starting to implement this Sonoran Desert Conservation Plan. The main way to do this was to start acquiring ranches with bonds passed with voter support in 2004 and 2007 were the 2 main bonds that funded 14 ranch acquisitions. And so these ranch acquisitions were the starting point to start to have some control over not only how ranches were managed to a certain extent, but also trying to use these ranches to connect important biological corridors. So the ranches are composed of fee land or private land that the county purchased outright, and many of the ranches came with large state grazing leases and BLM leases, which composed about 3/4 of the acreage. So total ranchland acreages that the county holds in fee and in lease land is almost 200,000 acres. So here's our map. After saying all of that, where are these ranches? So we have our ranches in the northeast. We call it our Northeast Zone, but in the Sonoran Desert Conservation Plan documents, it's known as the San Pedro Valley Reserve. We have ranches here in the Cienega Valley, which I'll be focusing on a little bit later. For our southeast ranches, we have 4. And you can see here that some of them are just fee land. The dark green is the fee land, and the light green is state or BLM grazing lease. Most of that is actually state lease. So you can see they're kind of checkerboarded out a little bit, but where they're in big chunks, that's where it becomes really important for that connectivity. We have 2 different reserves in the southwest of Tucson. I just, on the map, refer to these as the Altar Valley Reserves. We have the Northern Altar Valley Reserve and the Southern Altar Valley Reserve. And then in the northwest, we have the Tortolita Reserve, which we have one little piece of a ranch up there, but for the most part, it's Tortolita, I believe Tortolita Mountain Park or Tortolita Mountain Preserve up in that area. So for day-to-day rangeland program administration, when the ranches were acquired, in almost all cases, the agreement for the sale depended upon that rancher being able to lease the land back from the county and continue to run their cattle operation. And so this was done via ranch management agreements, which was an overarching agreement that basically encompasses state grazing lease if there was one, the BLM grazing lease if there was one, and the management on the Pima County fee land associated with that, all wrapped up into this one agreement, and it basically explains what the responsibilities are of that ranch, which is who now became the lessee of the land. So this agreement is similar to what ranchers might have with a federal or state agency, but it's a lot more involved because we have specific conservation elements we have to meet. And during our annual grazing planning meetings, we talk about everything, project planning. I meet with each rancher individually and their staff, if they have staff working for them. They're cowboys, they're ranch managers, they're cowgirls in some cases. And we talk about everything they want to do that year, how things went last year with the grazing planning, what the monitoring data is telling us, and how maybe we should make adjustments. So rangeland monitoring is a big part of the program. So we do have Pima County Range Management Standards and Guidelines that were collaboratively developed with U of A, local agencies, and local range consultants, basically to develop standards and guidelines that are widely accepted throughout the southwestern U.S. And are very common and line right up with federal and state or federal guidelines and how local universities are implementing rangeland management. So we try to stay up to date on what's proper management according to our ecological type. So we conduct long-term ecological monitoring at these plots that are permanent plots that were either established according to ecological site and pasture, sometimes long before Pima County acquired the ranch, and in some cases after Pima County acquired the ranch. Either way, we needed to, and we continue to monitor these monitoring transects, sometimes referred to as key areas, in order to keep track of condition and trend across these ranches that cover different ecological types. So it's always collaborative, this rangeland monitoring that we conduct every year following the monsoon. We try to invite anybody that's interested in coming out, that usually is the rancher and their manager, local NRCS agency folks, and sometimes my team members that either want to come out and help, or I really try to leverage them to come help because we need more people to help with this effort. And it's an opportunity to get out on the ground together and look at what's happening. And that's why I like this picture here of my two NRCS cohorts, Alicia Phipps and Brett Myers, and we just really enjoy being out there on the ground. I think Dan was there. Dan was there that day too. And so we're using science-based methods developed by scientists, specialists, consultants, and agencies that are widely accepted. And everybody has respect for all professions when we're out on the ground. So for example, when my colleagues from OSC and flood control were out helping with an effort this past fall, it was really neat to have people from different backgrounds helping with range monitoring, and it was nice to be able to share that information amongst each other in different viewpoints. So we're going to switch gears and talk about watershed and landscape level planning. Essentially, for each zone, our northeast, southeast, and southwest zones, we'd like to come up with a landscape level or watershed level resource management plan. And one way for us to get involved with that is to look at the big picture and find out who depends on landscape, what are the important resources, how many entities are involved, and what is the existing condition of what's out on the ground. And of course, what are the goals and objectives in that landscape or in that watershed? And what are the land uses? And then, from that overarching resource management plan, we can draw from that and create individual resource management plans for each ranch that would guide grazing management decisions. So one way that we got involved in this kind of process this past year, well, over the last year and a half or so, was to participate in the Las Ciénegas National Conservation Area Restoration Environmental Assessment that's currently being worked on and led by the local, the Tucson BLM office. And so here's our map again. So as you can see here, we have 4 county ranches. They're not labeled here, but we have the Bar V, the Amparita, and we have Sands Ranch and Klein Ranch down here. And this big piece here is the Las Ciénegas National Conservation Area, more or less, and dips down into here. And then there's other ranches and open space associated with that area as well. So I can't remember what happened first. We may have invited ourselves, but we now include our 4 ranches in the overarching planning area for this restoration EA, because we thought, well, we're adjacent. we're in the same watershed, let's work together and include these ranches as well, so we can do restoration projects under the same EA or environmental assessment if we want to. So that's how this second map came about or got bigger. The arrow, okay. So we participated in this process in the beginning by introducing the Barbie J6, or it's also known as the Emperita, and the Sands and Klein ranches in the planning area that I mentioned with the map. We developed ecological site-specific objectives for the county ranches that were based on the long-term ecological monitoring done on each of those 4 ranches. And we also provided guidance for these objectives across the rest of the LCNCA planning area, the Las Ciénegas planning area. And so this presentation is less data heavy. This is the most data you're going to see, really. But these are what the objectives kind of look like. It's an excerpt of one of our key areas or inventory transects on the Sands Ranch. Actually, it's 2 different key areas that fell on the same ecological site, Loamy Upland, in a 12 to 16 inch precip zone. So the main one to focus on here is the maintained velvet mesquite and velvet pod mimosa at less than 5%. Okay, so what does that mean? So here's our map again. And here's our ecological site, or okay, this is where our key area or monitoring transect is. It represents the Loamy Upland ecological site. And there's the, so basically this is where that is in the sands, on the Sands Ranch. So right about there, this is what it looks like. Many of you can recognize there's a lot of layman's love grass there. It looks like a monoculture. And yeah, I guess you could say that looks like maybe 5% mesquite. Scott gave me a good test on that a while ago, what percent that actually is. But when we talk about that objective, okay, does that mean just what you can see right there? Or, you know, how big is that ecological site? And where does your slope start to affect what your density of woodland should be? So those are the kind of questions that we need to answer as we move forward and where it's appropriate to do these treatments and what methods should be used, and just knowing how your soils and how your vegetation type will react once you do. So that's just an example of how we're getting down into the specifics of this large-scale restoration planning. So we're going to switch gears again, and we're going to get into opportunities for beginning ranchers. And this is also opportunities for current ranchers as well. It just has a focus on beginning ranchers. The first program we're working on, it's a proposed program, is a ranch lease program. So what happens when our current leases or our current county ranch management agreements expire and or ranchers want to retire? So what's the process when leases change hands? Because obviously in the past they've changed hands at some point, but they haven't changed hands yet since Pima County has had them. So this is something that I think we have to be really careful about how we proceed, because there is a huge demand for leased land, especially for beginning ranchers that may be very experienced, but they don't have access to affordable land. So this is something that can really benefit them. The second program we're working on is ranch education. I really think it's important for Pima County to help educate the community, not only of Tucson, but Southern Arizona, of why these working landscapes, why these working ranches with cattle or whatever livestock are so important. So we can't really do that unless we have some way of educating them and a site to show them. And we also want to know, how can we contribute to the beginning farmer and rancher pool? Is there a site where we can provide education in addition to what is already existing? So the ranch lease program, this is pretty simple, but as current ranch managers retire, these leases would essentially need to be advertised to the public as a county policy. But how we do that, we can be a little bit creative. We don't have to do every single one the same way, but especially for the more attractive ranch leases that have really good resources, we have a tool called Request for Proposal, which basically asks for a proposal from an entity or from the public that says, hey, how can you provide us the best management for example, for this ranch, instead of advertising something for the most money. And so as a result, I think if we implement the request for proposal, maybe test it out on a pilot, you know, on one of our first ranches that comes up, let's try it and see how it goes. This could really help make access to land more affordable for beginning ranchers that may not have a way to invest in buying a piece of private property that has a grazing lease attached to it. That's just not possible for a lot of people. And they have to pay for capital on top of all that to start or continue or expand their grazing operation or their livestock operation. So why not figure out a way within the county to be a little more flexible with this kind of thing, and at least make the land a lease and make it more affordable so they don't have to cough up a huge investment to lease land. So that's a summary of the proposal of our first program we're working on. So the second one is a proposal for our Bar V Ranch, which is right at the junction of Sonoyta and I-10 there. And I'll bring it up on the map in a couple slides here. But we think it would be a safe place for learning hands-on livestock management and environmental education for groups in the Tucson area, but also in southern Arizona and maybe from other places. This ranch is currently not leased out. The former lessee wound up actually walking away from the lease. So one of my staff, who was one of the A7 cowboys, and that's another story where the county had to manage its own cattle for a while on the A7 ranch. Floyd White was asked to live out at the Bar V Ranch and maintain the headquarters and start to work on the infrastructure on the state lease attached to this ranch, and rest it for a few years until we figured out what do we want to do with it. We could lease it out, but since it's such a neat ranch and it's close to the Tucson area, we thought let's try to build some sort of maybe a ranch education plan. Maybe we could have apprentices stay there, or one apprentice, and then have groups come out and tour, because we constantly get requests for ranch tours, and we want to learn about wildlife on ranches. We want to know how cattle interact with wildlife, and we thought, well, maybe this is the opportunity for that. Plus, Floyd could be a wonderful mentor, because he's a career cowboy and longtime ranch manager. And finally, connecting rangelands to meat production. So currently, we are talking with, I'm sorry, I should have showed you where Bar V Ranch was first. So this is the Bar V right here. So if you came to Sonoyta from Tucson today, you probably went this route and came down here. So it's off of Old Sonoyta Highway, just after this, just past the Sonoyta, right after you get off the Sonoyta exit. It's out here to the east. And it also covers really important natural and water resources that Julia and everybody else covered today. So we're currently working with the 4-H livestock program out of Tucson to see if this could be a consistent site for students either in high school or in college working on livestock specifically to come learn about rangeland grazed livestock. And we'd like to have this as their hands-on opportunity to learn. And the other big thing is hopefully to host a long-term apprentice, and maybe that turns over every year or every 2 years. But that, from my standpoint, I've been a ranch apprentice before, and it's a really great way to learn. If this is something you really want to go into and you just learn everything from fixing a fence to fixing a pipeline to marketing meat or coordination, teaching other people, you just learn so many things. So we think this could be a huge asset, and we have the facilities at the ranch to be able to do this. And lastly, our Pima County Environmental Education Program has tours quite often that want to go out to the Bar V. This is one tour we took out this past February, and they were just ecstatic to be out there. And we think this is going to keep being a pretty high demand thing. And it doesn't have to be programs just within the county. It could be other groups that want to come out and learn something, or other either student or members of the public that want to learn about ranching and food production. And that about wraps it up. So I don't know if there's time for questions now or if we want to wait for the panel. Okay, we're going to wait for the panel.